Hello guys, how are we doing and welcome back to the channel. If you struggle on Protocol Hardpoint, then today's video is going to be for you, whether you're a solo queuer or a quad stacking team. We're going to be going through the best setups on Protocol today. As I say, this isn't going to just benefit those of you who quad stack, because obviously this is going to be great if you quad stack. You can share this with your team. You can make sure you're holding these positions when you next load into Protocol. But for those of you who solo queue, it's going to hopefully enable you to understand how to fill the gaps better and how you can get the most out of your positioning and really help that team. With these setups, you're likely to win by more points in Hardpoint, and for those of you who know, the SR system works on largely how much you win by. So winning by more points, i.e. getting stronger holds in Hardpoint, will get you more SR, i.e. rank you up quicker. We're going to be kicking it off with P1. Obviously, it'd be bizarre to do anything else. And for those of you who struggle to sort of visualize the top-down perspective on this map, we're just going to quickly go through a couple of landmarks. So you've got the radio tower here, P2 is over in this area here, you've got the forest, helipad, and then like the useless docks area at the back. That's where we are. Okay, so I will be giving suggestions on where you can hold things from, but there's going to be a few things you'll notice every hold sort of does. Okay, so first of all, as a rule, every single position of these players are holding an area of the map and making sure that no gaps are left in the setup, okay, that people can't somehow leak through, because that's often what gets broken or gets teams broken. Okay, so first of all lanes are covered. Second of all, someone's blocking your spawn, so your spawns are stuck and you are making sure that you're spawning the enemies exactly where you know they're spawning them. And then sometimes on certain hard points, you've got a player who's playing that bit more aggressive role, making sure the enemy's spawning as far out. Okay, so quickly summary, the logic is you've got all lanes covered, you're holding the spawns, and you're spawning them as furthest away. And that's sort of the logic we've got here, but with some ideal positioning. So starting off in P1 here, we're going to start at the top. You've got a player out over the boat on the little lip bit, broken as you can call it, and they're pretty much watching this right-hand side to see if anyone pushes out of the spawn towards the bottom zip line. We then have a player sat next to the big gun in the middle of the map, pretty much watching the elbow push. So if any enemies come off spawn here, rush an elbow. They're watching that. We then got a player who looks to be somewhat useless and looks to be somewhat out of the action, and that is this player here, who's top bunk or grannies, whatever you want to call it. That player is actually really useful because this player here is blocking spawns. For P1, as long as you've got someone further over your halfway, if you imagine like a halfway line down here, this isn't going to be a spawn guide, obviously. It's too much detail. Actually, if you want to see a spawn guide of Protocol Hardpoint, you can do. It's on the channel, so make sure you search for that. But generally, a rule of thumb here, if you imagine a middle line just like this, as long as you've got players further back over that middle line than you do further forward, you're going to hold spawns. Okay, so that's why you need someone sort of sat back a little bit, preferably top bunk, and they're basically ensuring that you don't flip, you're holding these spawns and the enemies continue to spawn here, okay, whilst watching the steps up. Finally, you have the player number 3, who's watching elbow, similar to player 2, who's not just watching elbow, they're watching the whole push out of this building of P3, whether they come out of the bottom doors or jump out the top windows. This player's going to hold that. As I say, player 1's watching the heli steps. Player number 3, who's sat on the hard point, is one gathering time and watching elbow as well. As you can see here, all lanes are covered. P4 actually has player 4 has a really nice line of sight as well to the bottom. So if anyone decides to take a spiral route underneath, player 4 can spot them from this area. So these aren't rigid. I get a lot of people say, if my teammate dies, what do I keep watching, or what, you know, how does it work if someone dies in this setup? And because of where I've placed these positions, people can help wherever they want. Okay, so you can clearly see here, as I say, player 4 has got eyes looking under the map, so they can visually see if anyone's flanking. Alert player number 1, who can turn around and look for that kill. Player number 2 can also assist this right-hand side lane when it gets towards the end of P1 and P2 ends up about to be popped. A lot of the red team might emphasize the left-hand side push over here. So player number 2 can overlook this little boat and make sure that they can support player number 4, who may be struggling to stay alive. Player number 1, as I say, as well as blocking these back 2 spawns, they could be supporting elbow, they could be supporting mid-map. That's a real nice position to hold, but they need to play their life. As I say, if they're the one blocking the spawn, they need to make sure they stay alive. If this player dies, risk of the enemy spawning behind you is very high. Okay, so you may need, if you're this player here, you need to make sure you're playing your life as much as you can. And then obviously, additionally, player 3, if player 1 is preoccupied elsewhere, player number 3 can jiggle peek and make sure that they pick up heli stairs as well. But that's how the whole team can sort of help each other. But it's all about that communication at the end of the day and being very aware. If you can't communicate verbally, you're aware of what's happening on the minimap. A slightly more, you might say that's a bit of a defensive setup because you know, as I say, imagine a middle Imagine a middle line that goes down the map. You haven't got many people push past. You haven't got many people push past the hill. And as I said before, you need people as far back past that middle line as you have as far forward past that middle line, all right? In order to keep the spawns you've got. So if you want to get a little bit more aggressive here, you can see it's a fairly similar setup. Player 4 resides in the same spot. You can see the player 2's got a little bit more aggressive. They are now positioned atop catwalk, looking down at the stairs alone, realistically, because if they look out the back doors, there's a risk of blocking this spawn visually, which may spawn them out. You've then got player number 3 who sat right at the front of the hill, pretty much watching this left-hand side. And then finally, because how far pushed player 2 is, player 1 has had to back up even further than they were before. Bedroom or being top bunk or top grannies, whatever you want to call it, wasn't enough. If you see where they were here quickly, that wasn't enough. They've had to push back even more to this position to make sure number 2 doesn't spawn them out. Okay, so the further forward you've got a teammate, the further back you need one of your team, essentially, which is the logic here. So they're the blocker, and this is pretty much what you could be watching. Now, as I say, there's alternative perspectives from here. So if you feel like player number 2 may support middle if they want, they can literally hop out and lean on the window and look out towards middle, but they can also see catwalk at the same time. And as I say, player number 4 can also check bottom to make sure no one's flanking underneath. Yeah, it's that simple. Now, let's take a position of the other team, because sometimes, although the right-hand side for me is the preferred spawn, sometimes in a certain situation, you want to hold the P1 from this left-hand side, and you want to get as much time out of that as you can without having to think. Maybe it's the end of the game or something like that. From this position, we've got player number 6, who's pretty much holding a similar position to what the blue player was in the last slide, and they're watching this left-hand side completely, okay? Player number 6? Yeah. You then have a player top catwalk or top P3, overlooking this middle zone here. You then have a player number 5 who sat on P1, and they're pretty much watching this right lane here, this elbow. And then finally you have a player number 7 who's got pushed up a little bit further. They're at the top of the stairs in grannies, and they're basically making sure they can't through the top window or the bottom doors. Okay, there's a real nice line of sight they can see there. In this position, the player top P3 here is the one blocking these spawns. So if this player dies, the likelihood of the blue team spawning behind you is higher. The player that's now, you're probably wondering what these 2 blue circles mean. These are the spawn points, okay? Now, normally, what could happen, the blue team can spawn on this blue point here, but because of how far how far this player's pushed up, the default spawn for the blue team becomes here, which, as you can probably notice, is quite far from P1, so it's a really nice way to just hold this time and get the most out of this hill time. This position 2 also offers up some alternative perspectives, so from where we are here, you can see this player can also see underneath, similar to how it was on the other side. Player top P3 can also look over the hill and just get general map control. And as you can see from the screenshot, that player number 7 can also, whilst almost visually aiming in at this window, they can see on their peripheral the bottom door, so they can see if anyone decides to push underneath as well. Moving on to P2, a little bit of a weird setup. For me, I will always prefer this right-hand side spawn. These 2 blue circles represent the spawn point for this side, and the 2 orange ones represent the spawns for the left-hand side. And you can clearly see, if you can get your enemies spawning all the way out over here, you're looking like you're in a pretty good position, to be fair. So, where are we? First of all, let's cover that. So first of all, you have a player sound time. They are player number 2, and they're pretty much watching, as we can see here, they're pretty much watching the push around the boat, okay? So they're not being completely useless on the hill. They're having some sort of impact, but obviously they need to play their life, okay? They can get info, but as long as they play their life, that's the important thing. You then have a player sat above them, pretty much watching the longer line of sight across. So that player, the player number 2 really doesn't need to take on gunfights. The only reason they would is if the player who's looking over them needs to protect themselves and play their life a little bit. And at that point, it's when player number 2 sort of steps up. You then have player number 3 who sat back pallets. And in this position, they're making sure the enemy can't spawn at any 2 of these spawns, which is why they've got a little green circle around them, because they're the one that's blocking. And from there, they're watching pretty much the mid push. Finally, you have player number 4 who's sat on P1, and they essentially are pushed up enough to make sure that their team don't spawn in P3. The enemy team actually spawn all the way back forest, all the way over here, which is the ideal setup. As you can see, that's bloody miles away from P2. As always, there's alternative line of sights that people can take. So as I say here, the player on the hill can actually help player looking over them if they need support. Player number 4 can also look down elbow as well if they feel like that's where the pressure is coming from the enemy. You can shoulder it that general line of sight. But you can see here, most of the map has cover, and realistically, the only thing that isn't covered is an underground route, or a route around this right-hand side, but this player should be able to pick it off, and the underground route will be easily traded if that happens. But chances of them going the underground route, going up and out the other side, is relatively unlikely. Okay, so that's just something that you've got to keep an eye out for. Make sure you're checking the names and the kill feed. If you see 3 go down over and over again, and you're looking for one player and you're missing one player, it's best to commit someone to watching that flank. But let's say you're happy holding this left-hand side. Okay, I've seen a couple people like to hold it from this side because it gives them the better spawns for P3, which is here. Now, although the far spawn for this blue team now becomes all the way over here, it's still not quite as far as this spawn was for the red team, which is why I prefer the blue side spawn for P2. In any case, we've got someone P1 watching the bottom push through bottom middle. You've then got a player top P3, which is the one holding these spawns. They've got the green ring around them, which means they're the one that's blocking these back 2 spawns. And they're pretty much watching the top pallet push, or they're looking into the torture room or hut, whatever you want to call it, making sure they can't come through this direction. You then have a player sort of on the top lit bit, like top mid. And from there, they're looking at pallets as well. So there's almost like a cross section. A lot of traffic does end up being here. And then finally, you've got a really, really important player. Player would be sat behind the box looking through the door, and in doing so they're getting hill time, and they're also blocking this close blue spawn which spawns the enemy all the way out over here. Now what you're probably wondering, why this player's so far away from the hill, and it's because it's so that they can't get through. It's as simple as that. It's so the enemy team can't get through and get to P2 easily, or get round like this. You can see here, all as the map is covered, the only thing that is open is the underground route, which doesn't directly impact P2. But again, you just got to be careful in names. You've got to be making sure you're killing the same 3 people over and again. And whoever's got the most, and it should be this player who's counting names, because they're likely to see the least action. Again, there's some alternative line of sights people can have on this hill. So the player on P1 can help to watch this elbow push as well. The player top P3 has to stay alive if they want to hold these back left spawns, because otherwise the enemy team risk spawning in. But from up here, they can also help across P1. They can also help middle. They can also help if they go to the top zip. They can look over P2 directly. The player who's top broken can look over the hill as well. So there's a lot of support you can have here as a team in ensuring that the enemy can't break you down, so that even if a player on your team dies, you've got someone to somewhat fill the gap. But the 2 vital players here are the one in time and the one top P3. They need to stay alive for this to work. Moving on to P3, this finds itself in the bottom of this building here. In this position, where these players are, we're blocking the back spawn, which is what you want to do. You want the enemies to spawning on this right-hand side. And at the same time, you've pushed out far enough so that you're blocking the 2 closer spawns, and the enemy spawns at the farthest possible spawn out. I don't know why these are here. It should probably be over here. But where are we? Where are we to get that happening? Okay, so the player on hill is pretty useless in here. So I've got to admit, they're pretty useless, but they're getting the hill time, and whilst they're getting the hill time, they're also blocking this back spawn. And what they need to be doing from here is making sure they're on the very backside of P3, otherwise it risks not blocking this spawn. While they're here, they can look at these backsteps if they want. It gives them something to do other than just sit there with a controller on the desk, and that will at least check that if somehow a player from the blue team goes all the way around to get to this point, there's someone at least watching that. You may as well watch something. You then have a player top of P3, just watching the push out of the elbow. Obviously, with the traffic from the enemy team coming from this direction, a lot of the traffic's going to come through this elbow and through P, just around this area itself, which is why a lot of these arrows are focused in this direction. But the player top P3 basically watches elbow. The player can be, this player on our elbow, on this P3 elbow, sits on top of barrels and can see over this green box and can see all the way through bottom grannies, making sure that 1, they're not pushing through grannies to get up the stairs or anything like that. But 2, you'll see if anyone decides to go underground from grannies, which will be able, and which is great comms, because you'll be able to tell this player here that they're coming from bottom. Finally, you have a player who's pushed out to the mid gun, and this player is also impacting spawn. So this player mid gun is basically ensuring that they can't spawn here, which basically helps the enemy spawn all the way over here, which is what you want because it's quite far away. Whilst they're here, they're watching their push through pallets, and it's relatively quite simple. So you can see we've got a really solid setup here. People are watching the right, someone's watching the push down the middle, someone's watching the left, and the player on the hill time is just blocking. So it's relatively, hopefully, quite logical. Obviously, the players can provide support to each other. Top P3 can help the player push through pallets if there seems to be people push through that way. The player mid-gun can help the front of P1. The player on the barrel can also help P1 if there needs to be. Generally speaking, all of these players here are owning this top middle, and this player here is getting the time and blocking the spawn at the same time. Now, if you are concerned about the push around this right-hand side, because, you know, if, as I say, a player can go all the right-hand side if you want, you can set up a little bit differently. So instead of having someone top P3, you have them on this outer lip here. And basically what this does is it enables them to hold the pallet push. They can then hold it underneath. And again, you can share the responsibility amongst these three, making sure they can't get around to the hill, essentially. So if you are concerned about this right-hand push, this is a setup you could have, but realistically, it's going to be rare. With them spawning here, they're probably just going to hit front and forward every single time. Unless there's a lot of time left on the hill. Moving on to the final hill of the game. This one I see people make this same error on over and over again. It's people feel like they have to commit everybody to the bottom of the map. The spawns here are pretty much the same as P1. If I'm going to really generalize this, if you imagine a line that goes through the middle of the map like so, if you've got players pushed over that middle line mark, you need player pull back just far enough. And as long as you've got a more weight towards this right hand side, towards the left, you'll always hold this right-hand side spawn, okay? Which is why we've got a couple of players played quite deep. So, first of all, you have two players sat on time, sat underneath, and it's their job to watch. Actually, we're not going to start with them two. Rewind a bit. First of all, you've got a player at the top here. They're sat on the little cut-in, a P2 or tower, and they're basically watching the right-hand side push through boat, okay? So they've got a real nice influence on this right-hand side, and they're making sure the enemies can't come through the big door. In doing that, they're also blocking this spawn because of how close they are and how pulled back they are. Secondly, we have a player top grannies, and they're basically watching the higher push out of P3. Because they're so far pushed back as well from this middle line, they're also blocking these back two spawns. Now, this player has got the whole of middle covered. This player's got the whole of right covered, which means the enemy can't get through the big door, nor can they get down the zip, meaning the players who are left on the hill only have to watch a single direction. All they need to watch is spiral. So as long as they, you know, play smart, hold good position, I've got a couple of examples here where they can hold, then you're probably in for a treat and you're going to get 60 seconds on this hill. Obviously, it's not that simple. If player number one here struggles holding this boat side, a lot of teams like to put their push as, let's say a couple of enemies on the red team want to push boat and this player number one is struggling, they can play their life. They can then decide to take up the zip line, see if anyone's pushing zip line. And then a player from the hill can actually look at boat and get on that really nice heady looking out if they would like to. As I say, the alternative line of sight for player 4 as well could be elbow. Obviously, the only thing that's missing here is a push all the way around this left-hand side through heli. But if player number 4 jiggle peeks at every 10 seconds or so, they're going to make sure that no one's coming around that angle, all right? So that's the best way you can hold it, either this setup or this setup, depending on which way you want the focus to be from this side. But let's say you don't want to hold it from this side. Let's say you've somehow got these spawns on the left and you want to hold it from the left-hand side. This is how it looks. So again, you're going to notice here, you draw that a line through the middle of the map, you've got more of an emphasis on your team on the left than you have the right, basically ensuring that the teams don't flip. And that's the most important thing, okay? First of all, you've got player number 7, who is sat on this broken lip bit over here. And they are essentially pushed up enough for the enemy not to spawn here. Okay, that's why they've got that spawn, that little spawn circle underneath them. From here, the enemy can't get to the big door because this player's got this whole line of sight covered, meaning that they can't get to that area of the map. We then finally have there's 3 players left. We then next have a player who is top P3. And you might be wondering why they're here. And that's because they're watching the push through to P1 or watching the push around P1, making sure their top middle is relatively covered, okay? So you've got this player, making sure they can't come left or come through the pallet side, and also blocking this. You've then got a player top P3, who's making sure that as they're spawning here, they can't just come around to P1 and try and get a pinch. You then have a really important player here, okay? Player number, whatever player number that is sat on elbow on the barrels, a similar position we had on, I think it was P3. And from here, with these doors open, which you can shoot open if you don't know, they can pretty much see the entire way through bottom grannies, ensuring that they can catch any players going down the zip line. And then you have the player on the actual hill. Okay, this player on the actual hill is basically playing off the info fed from this player here. So if this player here is seen a player go down the zip line, they could probably kill them. To be fair, if it's one player, they could probably kill them. If it's more than one player, they can communicate that. And if they communicate that there's more than one player pushing on the zip line, the player from the lip here can, instead of having their focus towards the top middle, they can then ADS into the bottom of P4, sorry, helping out the person who's actually sat on the hill. While this player isn't covering top middle, the player top P3 then can pick up middle, as well as support P1 potentially. In the player number 5, whilst this player here is watching pallets, player elbow can also watch the push through P1, as well as keeping an eye on that push through to the bottom zip line, okay? And that's a real nice way of holding. You don't need everyone bottom P4 to hold P4. Obviously, if it's super scrappy and you don't rotate early enough, you're going to end up being just trade at the bottom. Absolutely fine. But if you can get into a really nice setup like one of these, if you give P3 up early and somehow just set up like this, if you don't somehow get good spawns for P3, set up like this, you're almost guaranteed really good spawns, okay? The only thing that might cock you up is you don't have enough players committed to Spiral. And if that's the case, you're going to have to dedicate 1 or 2 of these players. I'd probably argue this player here to go down to the bottom and help out, because they can just get the zipline down, and they can assist quite simply. But the biggest thing here, when the enemies spawn in, pull back to your side and the enemies will continue to spawn their side, okay? That's something so vital on this map, on this hardpoint specifically. So that'll do for me. I hope you enjoyed. It's gotten dark since I started recording, so that shows how long it's been. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the day. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now.